Welcome everyone. My name is Ruth Samalo. I'm one of the feature programmers for Doc NYC, and it's my great pleasure to have you here for the Q&A of Crutch. And we have directors Sachi Cunningham and Vayabobo, and we have Bill Shannon, the protagonist, main character artist of the film. Welcome everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah. It's such a fantastic film that you made, and we're very, very excited to have it. I particularly love how this is as much a film about you and your artistic process and your life as it is about us, the audience members, because you pose a lot of questions about our ableism and our assumptions as we're watching this film, and I think that is absolutely brilliant. Tell us a little bit about your collaboration, how the three of you met, and how did you decide to work on this amazing story of your artwork and your philosophical and political practice?
I can start because actually I think the film started in the first grade for me. Bill and I went to the same elementary school in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and he's a few years older than me, but I very vividly remember Bill as a young boy standing alone during recess, and he had the braces that you see in the film, and always wondering what his story was, who he was, what his story was. So I never found out in first grade, but I ended up going to middle school with his younger brother, and went to high school with Bill and his younger brother. His younger brother was actually my high school sweetheart, and Bill and I kept in touch over the years. And when he started working for Cirque, he gave me a call just catching up at a very kind of turning point in my career, where I was working at MGM at the time, having worked in feature films and narrative films for about a decade, and was looking for a documentary project. And Bill just kind of called out of the blue and said he was choreographing Verikai at Cirque du Soleil and going to Montreal. And I was like, can I interview you? Can I follow you with the camera? I don't think he really realized what he was getting into at the time, but that's how it evolved on my end. And then Chandler and I went to Brown University together, and we met through a biracial students group, and then reconnected when we were both living in LA. Chandler had been working on a film about the first blind man to climb Mount Everest, and I at that point had a trailer for Crutch, and we met up, and I'll let Chandler take it from there.
Yeah, so Sachi, we bumped into each other in LA, and she was like, I have this amazing project, I want you to take a look. And she had all this incredible footage of Bill, and I was blown away, of course. And we worked together to edit it down into a 4-minute promo. And this is back in, I think, 2006. And we put it on this site called YouTube, which no one, was as big as it is now. And about a month later, YouTube was actually sold to Google. And when they sold it, Steve Chen and Chad Hurley, the founders of YouTube, they put a video on the front page of YouTube telling everyone the good news. And then after it, they featured our promo. So it came right after. And at that point, we went viral. So very early on. And I think both Sachi and I were like, wow, I think we have something really special, because people are responding to this in amazing ways. And that started our 20-year odyssey working with Bill.
20 years? Wow.
Mm-hmm.
But there is Bill, how did they convince you to make this incredible film about many different aspects of your life as an artist and as a thinker? And like there's like 8mm films from the 70s, like high 8 VHS, like I think super beautiful HD footage. I think this film is also the story of like cinema in a way, and like the way that you work with technology in your performances, and in the way your performances have evolved from just pure documentation of like your dance routines and your choreography, all the way to these very sophisticated theatrical events. Remind me of like Laurie Anderson, and like really really interesting work. Like tell us a little bit about your relationship with technology and your relationship with like the making of this film.
Well, I guess I should probably start where Sachi started, grade school. And, just kind of, like I think the standing alone part's kind of true. I was the only disabled kid in the whole school, and so I kind of had to kind of forge my own path in a way and figure out my own relationships. And that led into a career in the arts. I think the arts were probably the most appropriate place for me to go to, considering my history and the creative energy I had. And, so I had a career going, and had talked to Sachi, and, she was like into making documentary film. And, at the time I was a multimedia, interdisciplinary artist, and I had tons of cameras, and was always trying to make new things happen. And so anybody who walked up to me and said, I'm going to follow you around with a camera, I'm like, okay, let's go, because it was just, I was the one always having to pick up the camera and try to document what was happening as I was also trying to do it. And I think, as an interdisciplinary artist who uses video and uses the physical body, it's really hard to do both at the same time. And I've explored a lot of how to do that at the same time. But ultimately, having someone show up and be like, I can do this, And when I remember the first time, we got together, and I handed Sachi my TRV 900, and I used a hanger to attach a Sony mic. I wired a hanger up to it, and so it had like this microphone that like bounced around when you shot. It was really, and that is the journey of the doc, is also a journey of technology, the journey of what we had accessible to us at that point, and what we were using. And so I think that's an interesting observation. And, I definitely over the years have experienced that. Even now, hey, Bill, do you have footage of this? And I'll be like, is it in my high 8s, my regular 8s, my mini DV, my DVC
VHS.
Pro, my Beta, I even have European PAL, all that stuff. So it's just all over the place. So yeah, that was really the birth of the doc, was sort of in this sort of wanting to have other people interested in media, that I wasn't actually directing Sachi, like I could, I had another person, a tech person in my shows who I was working with. So, it was just this satellite kind of presence that was able to get traffic in the way that they got it. Because I didn't have, being an arts person, you don't have money. I don't have money to hire 3 people to come and stand on the bus with me. I was like, okay, great. This really ties in really well. I have somebody here on the bus who is really motivated to get this footage as best as possible. I don't have to pay them, thank God, because I really wouldn't have been able, it would have been documented with 1 or 2 cameras, So I think that the doc became, in a way, an essential sort of element of my practice as an interdisciplinary artist, because I could go back and edit. It was a free exchange. They gave me the video of traffic that then I was able to use in presentations and phenomenological sort of conversations about, public space and performance and disability and hip hop and skateboarding and all the things that go into the material and the work. So I think that this longtime partner of my career, reaching this point, is kind of fitting. It's 2020, I mean, the doc's going to end, the world's going to, who knows, like,
Yeah.
So yeah, I guess that's my answer. Yeah.
Well, also there's the very first shot of the film right now is from that tape. Literally, it's tape 001 that I did, that interview Bill was describing with the wire hanger. That opens the film right now. So that's kind of a nice bookend to all of that. And I also didn't know what I was doing when I started. And that's what led me to, after that first interview and starting to work with Bill, who at that point had much more knowledge of video than I did. I applied to the journalism school, a documentary program at UC Berkeley, shortly after starting the film, in large part because I just realized I didn't know what I was doing and I needed to learn if I was going to make this film. So
well, I think it's a very complex and layered film, and it's also super fun to watch, which is like weird to say, but I think it's very much in line with, the kind of a style that some of your art pieces have, and like your energy, Bill, I think. But also I don't think it shies away from like being very careful to never give us anything close to something that I've seen you quoting as inspirational porn. And I wanted to ask you about like what kind of conversations did you have in terms of like how much of like disability, theory or way of thinking you wanted to put in the film, because I think it does so many things. It's like definitely like a biographical film. It's definitely an artist portrait, very complex and layer, but it's also a film that really like is an experiment because it put us in places and in positions to rethink our assumptions, but it's also a film about disability theory in some ways, or political stance. So how did you have like these kind of conversations, and how did you make sense of like this monster of archive and probably footage that you had?
Well, I think, oh, go ahead.
No, go ahead. I was going to say you should go ahead.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I really look at it, when you talk about a conversation, you're talking about me talking to Sachi and me talking to Chandler. And those are two different eras. Like what started out, I was all interfacing with Sachi. And then later, I was interfacing mostly with Chandler. So, and I met Chandler along the way. And so those conversations also evolved over time and became more complex. So my conversations with Sachi were like a lot more raw, and I was figuring things out, and I didn't know exactly what to say, and I didn't have the language, and and it was a complex relationship because I would be like performing and see her using a camera in a way that the white balance was off or something like little, but it would be like, okay, I have to manage still, like help me make the doc in the very early stages. And then all of a sudden now she knows way more than I know, like about cameras and everything. And so that sort of arc of like my own knowledge and then my ability to communicate that knowledge changed over time. And my relationship to the directors also changed. So, later in the later years of the doc, I'd be talking to Chandler on the phone. Sometimes I'd come out to Venice, mainly to just experience Venice and then talk to Chandler. And, we would be able to kind of, I'd be forced to like articulate more and more and more, and Chandler would say, I'm getting it. I see it. Like there was sort of a turning point where I feel like my language and their comprehension did that sort of crossover where all of a sudden I was able to express more and they were able to understand more. And I think that was a really important evolution in the final product that you see. Mm-hmm. And that said, I would still have a very different film than they have. You know what I'm saying? Like I have very uncomfortable sections of the film, obviously. But I think most people who have a doc made about them probably have sections of that doc that they're very uncomfortable with. So there is that sort of looking in the mirror kind of like dynamic to it that's complicated. But I do think the disability politic, even on the disability politic, there's certain things that I definitely would have not done in the film. But overall, I would say that they really got the general direction and like the specifics of my own, sort of approach. So it's a complicated answer. It's it was arguments. It was questions asked that I felt like were not fair or wrong or were insulting. So I had to like come up with tools to manage people asking me questions and also come up with the language to give to them so that I could have the question asked that doesn't presuppose, because a lot of questions are loaded. Mm-hmm. So you ask a question, but within the question is assumptions. Mm-hmm. And those assumptions, if you don't agree with those assumptions, how can you answer the question fairly? So it's also like being able to then disassemble the question, take out the section, replace the language, and all doing it in real time while somebody's actually verbally asking you a question. So that's kind of a process of getting the experience and the language together. So
there was definitely a steep learning curve because not only are Sachi and I coming to the film from an able-bodied perspective, but Bill literally created his own language. So like he was sometimes and discussions would get very heightened, and sometimes he'd be talking about things and he's talking about his phenomenological experiments and experiences and using vocabulary that he's created, and would sit there and be like, okay, yeah. And then after the conversation, I'd be like, oh man, I have no idea what he really said, And it's like Bill said, like it took a while. Sachi and I would kind of joke that we had to learn how to speak Crutchese because to to learn what the language actually meant, and really understand that he's out there on the front line, sort of like defining and showing people these things that are happening that are so like delicate and intangible, and he's going out and like actually capturing them and saying, here it is, like you can look at it and this is what it's called, and so once we really understood this vocabulary, I really think that's where like our collaboration took off.
I also think the evolution of Bill's art played a big role. That he was explaining his language. His language was evolving in interfacing with us, but also I think his window bench traffic installation pieces and at the end when we're on the bus, those all happened later in the process and were the result, I think, of an evolution in his art. And as filmmakers, our executive producer Stephen Nemeth has always said that this isn't a film. We've never really had a budget per se, and I don't think it's a film that would be easy to create a budget for, because we were just kind of in the wings watching Bill's art evolve and trying to communicate, trying to tell his story through his art.
Yeah, I mean, we shot this over 20 years, so it's like you couldn't budget that. It had to be guerrilla. So sort of the film is what we have now as a result of the necessity of staying with Bill and watching his evolution. And we were really lucky too, because Bill did evolve. Like we have footage in the film where he's opening up his notebook and saying, hey, I have these ideas for this trio of projects, to capture the stuff. And at that point, that was one of those things that I was like, I don't know what he's talking about, and he manifested that. And I think like we're really, really fortunate to have been able to stick with him, and for him to allow us to stick with him, and that we were able to see those things manifest.
Yeah. I will say also, I'll just add that as it also really helped to have Chandler as a partner, a really intelligent partner, because I think it took those conversations between us to try and, as Chandler said, understand Crutchies, and I definitely could not have done that on my own.
Yeah,
I mean, I'm also a filmmaker, and I understand that the best films are usually the films that where like the tensions, along that make you grow and understand where the film needs to be, make the film better, because it made it more nuanced and and layered. So I think it's an extraordinary piece, and I've been told that we have to go, but I have these my pet psychoanalytic questions, and I apologize if it's bullshit. You can just call it. But Bill, there is something that I think is brilliant that happens in the film, and this is perhaps because I'm writing my dissertation about like grief and and the wounded child, but like there's this kind of like full circle thing that happens in the movie when you become the mentor and the teacher of these groups of children, and it's visible that you're vulnerable and you're like thinking about like the situation that you were in when they were their age. So there is like kind of like this full circle of allowing you as a fully realized human today to look at the difficulties that you had as a kid, and perhaps my bullshit question is like, do you think that there is something like healing in that and transformative that has also allowed you to grow through the making of this film and through the different activities that you did with the children?
Well, the whole thing with the children came out of the doc. Like the doc existed, and then it was like, hey, we can make this happen. We know these kids who have Perthes, and my work isn't really focused on working with kids or working with this disabled people exclusively. I mean, I do have projects with people with disabilities and whatever. So this was kind of an anomaly for me, going to this camp of kids. Like in my career, I would never have done that. So the documentary kind of took me to a new place that was really specific to the disease that I had at the age that I had it. And I had literally met like one person in a waiting room who had Perthes before I went to that camp. And I was really blindsided by the wave of emotions around when I got there. And it wasn't even really about the disability. It was about what was happening in my family at that time in my life. That, it was just such a tough time. for me to get through that I was overwhelmed with emotion, you know, and then performing for the parents and realizing the parents dealing with their kids and then kind of connecting to the fact that I was a parent and that my parent, if I, you know, and I was trying to put myself in their shoes, and it was just a really, it was overwhelming and surprisingly overwhelming to the extent that, you know, I was changed. And, you know, I do think that it was an important experience for me. You know, it was like really, it did kind of change my understanding of that time of my life. In the sense that I hadn't really looked at that personally. So yeah. And it was fun, you know, it was a fun time.
Well, thank you so much to the three of you for making this film happen. It's brilliant, and we are so proud to have it in our lineup. So thank you, everyone.
Yeah,
Oh,
we're so
thank you.
honored to
We're
be
really
part of
grateful.
your festival. Yeah.
Yeah, really grateful for you premiering it. Thank you.